Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining the Arizona Capital Times Morning Scoop online. And today we are talking to and discussing really the update to the 2020 session with legislative leaders. One housekeeping note, nominations for Best of the Capitol are now open, so please visit azcapitaltimes.com and look for the Best of the Capitol tab. And don't forget to send in your nominees. My name is Luigi Del Puerto. I'm the associate publisher and editor of the Arizona Capital Times. The Arizona Capital Times, of course, covers state government and Arizona politics. A lot of people describe us as an independent, nonpartisan, non-ideological newspaper, but as our panel members know, really more of a, or I'd like to refer to ourselves as an equal harassment newspaper. So again, thank you for joining us. And I want to thank our sponsor this morning for engaging with us this way. Without our sponsor support, we would be limited in our ability to host forums like this one. Our sponsor this morning is Compass Strategies. Compass Strategies is proud to support the Arizona Capital Times efforts to foster open dialogue between legislators and the public during these unprecedented times. Led by Kelsey Lundy, a Capitol veteran with over 20 years of government relations experience, the Compass team also includes Jesse Arment and Alexandria Mendoza. And they usually have the same haircut, by the way. This trio is very grateful for the privilege to work with some of the best companies and organizations in the state and aspires each day to serve their clients in a manner that is highly ethical, practical, and rooted in hard work. They have great admiration for the legislative leaders with us today who serve their constituents in the same fashion. Our panelists don't really need a whole lot of introduction. Senator David Bradley is the Senate Minority Leader, and prior to joining the Senate, Senator Bradley served in the Arizona House of Representatives from 2003 to 2011. He also served previously as chairman of the Pima County Democratic Party, as vice chair of the Pima County Democratic Party, and as president of Democrats of Greater Tucson in the late 1990s. He is the Chief Development Officer of La Frontera, Arizona. Senator Bradley is a licensed professional counselor, and you kind of need to listen to his floor speeches because he will use a word you've never heard before. And he is term limited, and this is his last year in the Arizona Legislature. And Senator Bradley, I don't think you imagine this as your last year and the way things are unfolding, I suppose.
No way. Had no clue. Was hoping that we'd be out of there at our regular end of April, beginning of May time and be done. And Karen would call me every month and say, hey, there's nothing to talk about. And we go from there. And then I would get to watch the election and not have to knock on doors after knocking on about 250,000 doors in my life. I'm very happy not to be knocking on doors right now.
It's really a time of the year when the weather is so beautiful to be knocking on doors, like it's like 100+ degrees.
Right.
Also joining us is Senate President Karen Fann. Senate President Karen Fann is the second female Senate President in the history of Arizona. She represents Legislative District 1, which covers 8,000 square miles throughout Yavapai County and portions of Maricopa County. She also serves as chairwoman of the Senate Rules Committee. Voters first elected Senator Fann in November of 2016, and she previously served as a state representative from 2011 to 2016. President Fann moved to Prescott at the age of 4 and has been a lifelong Republican. She also serves as a precinct committee woman and is a member of the Rotary International and Elks. President Fann is a small business owner. How's your business, Senator Fann?
Luigi, I am blessed because I am in essential service. As you know, I'm a highway contractor, and we have a lot of projects going on all over the place. As a matter of fact, my poor husband has even been pulled out of the mothballs. He's having to run a job here in Casa Grande, a night job. So we're very blessed. We're getting to keep our employees working and keeping our highway safe.
I'm glad to hear that. Also joining us this morning is Representative Charlene Fernandez. Representative Fernandez is the House Minority Leader. She represents Legislative District 4. She also serves on the Committee on Appropriations. She was first elected to the State House in 2014 and represents Southwestern Arizona, specifically the majority of Yuma County, Western Pima County, Southwestern Maricopa County, and Southwestern Pinal County. Representative Fernandez also serves on the Arizona Food and Agriculture Policy Advisory Committee, and she advocates, of course, for food security. She previously worked for Congressman Ed Pastor for 12 years, coordinating constituent services for the western portion of then Congressional District 2. She was also Governor Janet Napolitano's liaison for the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality in Yuma County. Ma'am, when was the last time you ventured outside your home?
March 23rd, when we left, when we adjourned out, I came home and I've been taking walks. I've been taking lots of long walks. The weather's been gorgeous here in Arizona. When you said, I think you were being facetious when you said who wants to knock on doors when it's 100 degrees. We
Yes.
always knock on doors, but this is kind of, you know, we're at home and we're not knocking on any doors, but making plenty of phone calls. So thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
Very happy to be here.
The Representative TJ Shope is the Speaker Pro Tem of the Arizona House of Representatives. He represents Legislative District 8, resident of Coolidge, Arizona. Representative TJ Shope has long been active in the community. He was born in Florence and graduated from Coolidge High School. He is also a graduate of Central Arizona College before earning a Bachelor's of Science degree in Political Science from Arizona State University. Representative Shope also serves as chairman of the House Ethics Committee, which I will note is a very busy committee this year. And he is the son of former Coolidge Mayor Tom Shope and Luz Shope, and he co-owns their family business, Shope's IGA Supermarket in Coolidge. How's your supermarket, Representative Shope?
Busy and safe.
Do you have?
For sure. I mean, we do have toilet paper.
Okay, good. Good. Thank you. I'm glad to hear that. To our audience, let me just remind you, you can, and I do want you to send in your questions via the chat room or via the Q&A room. So don't hesitate to send them in. We'll try to get to them, to as many as we can throughout this conversation. I guess really the burning question in everybody's mind is the state of the 2020 session. And let me just ask, let me start with Senate President Karen Fann. Ma'am, what is the state of the 2020 session?
Gee, that's a really good question because it changes every day. So as of about a week and a half ago or so, we had the majority of the Republican members, not all, but the majority of them, as well as all of our Democrat colleagues, wanting to sine die. And I'll let Senator Bradley address his side of it if anything's changed for him, but that's the way it was a week and a half or so ago. And then because of frustrations and constituent pushback, I don't have that majority today. So we're going to work through the problems that we have that has been going on the last 5 or 6 days, see if we can solve those problems. Then we'll go back and ask them again, are you ready to do the other? We do have some members, and I know that, and I'll let the House talk to that, but yes, we do have a few members that want to go back and just start where we left off. Don't think that's a very wise thing to do, but we'll talk through that.
Oh, so Senator Fann, just want to make sure I understand this one. You're saying before you had the majority of your caucus, but now you don't.
Correct.
But you still have the majority of the Senate, correct?
That is correct. If all the Democrats were still on board, and with a handful of Republican caucus members that still would like to sine die, I do have a majority. But as you know, you don't move something with all of the opposing party and 2 or 3 of your own. That usually doesn't set well. It's much better if you have a better consensus amongst your own caucus.
I have seen that happen in the past a couple times. But Senator Bradley, let me confirm with you, all of your members are for sine die, is that correct?
At this point, yes, that is true.
So in theory, if 2 or 3 Republicans join with you and effectively force a sine die, that's feasible.
Yes, yeah.
Technically, at least. Yeah.
Technically,
okay. All right.
Yeah.
Let me ask Representative Shope, what is the status in the House, sir?
I think the status in the House is pretty similar to what President Fann laid out. You know, I don't think it's that much different. I think that there's a healthy number of our members who are, I think it's almost broken down into thirds, really. I think there's a group of folks that would like to go or fine with sine die, because they understand that if we do come back for a special session, many of their agenda items could be incorporated into something. I think a lot, and you know, we talked about this, Luigi and I. What does, you know, things like COVID related mean? Does that mean strictly on the health side? Does that mean strictly, you know, does that incorporate some things on economic development? Does that, or kickstarting the economy? So I think that there's another group of folks that are fine with sine die if those types of things are incorporated as well. And then there's a group of folks who would, just as you mentioned, would prefer to go ahead and just pick up where we left off. Understandable. It's not just the members that have those strong feelings. You know, most of the bills that come forward are truly constituent driven. We've heard the testimony from those folks in committee. And while we do have a pandemic going on, those issues still mean an awful lot to those people, not just those members, but the folks that brought those bills forward to members. So yeah, it's kind of a mixed bag.
So I know Senator Fann is for sine die. That was the original plan. Senator Bradley is on the same page. What about you personally, Representative Shope? Are you for sine die as well? And I mean immediate sine die?
I am fine with that. I was pretty much it took me a little while to get there, but yes, I could go down. I could be along with that. I could also be along with any other avenues that we go through. However, it is extremely difficult, and this is one of the things that I let my caucus mates know, that whenever they contact me, is to kind of buttonhole everything into what is going to be kind of COVID related or economic development related is going to mean that some members and some folks are going to not have their signature piece of legislation go through. And that's a difficult thing. People do get wrapped up. They have put a ton of work into things. I have a few issues myself where I'm looking and seeing, it's like, well, I don't know that I could make an argument that this is relative to the situation, the new normal, if you will, that we have today. So that is something that each of us are going to have a conversation with ourselves, and our folks have brought these things forward to see if they actually do fit into that equation.
Representative Fernandez, ma'am, I think it's very clear from the House Democratic Caucus that you are for sine die. You've been pushing for an immediate end of the session. Walk us through. So first of all, I'm presuming that is still the case, correct?
Well, and as Senator Fann knows, because she and I have had a couple of conversations, she knew that we had 29 members that are there to sine die, but they are also there if we're going to work on COVID related, and COVID related does include the economy, how we're going to kickstart economy, what it's going to look like, the new normal, what it's going to look like in the short term and the long term. We know this is a long-term game, and we want to start thinking about legislation for, you know, that will help people next year as well as this year. So we had 29 members that are ready to go back and work on COVID-related legislation. So, you know, I let Speaker Bowers know. I called him, and I thought it important that Senator Fann also know, as well as Mr. Bradley. We work closely together. He knows exactly where the House stands. But I made that call to Senator Fann to let her know, too, that we're there to work.
So,
Louis, could I
yeah,
add to that, please? Yes. I wanted to make sure that everybody was fully aware that, and thank you, Representative Fernandez, for pointing that out, as well as Representative Shope. One of the things we're dealing with is that originally when we talked about coming back in, we were talking about COVID related. However, there's a number of members that totally want to pick up where we left off. They want to have committees again, and they want all their bills. I mean, it started with, okay, 100, 150 bills. Now we're up to 200 or 250. Now, I just want, for the record, to make sure I have been very emphatic about this. If we are going to do anything that is policy and particularly that magnitude of bills, then we're going to be open for business. We are not going to do this behind closed doors. We are not going to, if we're going to do work, then the doors are going to be open for lobbyists, public, and everybody to come in and attend committee meetings. So that is something that everybody needs to consider. This will not be done via Zoom or anything else. We don't roll that way. We want to be 100% transparent.
So I'm sorry, I want to make sure I understand that one, ma'am. So you're saying that initially, of course, the plan was to sine die. That sort of changed, and there is conversation, and it seems that people are amenable to going back to resume the session to do COVID-19 related legislation, and it's something that would help us confront this pandemic and maybe position the state going forward, so we can reopen the economy in a stronger footing, and then it also provides a path forward for solving the deficit, for example. So there is that conversation. What you're saying is that now there are other bills that are being pushed to be included in that mix. And whereas before it's like, what did you say, 50 bills, and now it's up to 200 bills? Is that an ongoing?
100 to 150, and now it's up to 200 and 250. We have members in the House and the Senate that say, we want to go back and just pick up where we left off. And there's a lot of bills that were hanging out there.
So that's, in theory, right? We see about 300 or so bills that are passed every year. And, that's out of 1,500 or so bills. 250 bills seems like a lot of bills to go through, given the fact that, it's summertime and some of you would have to go into electioneering mode here in a couple weeks.
Yes.
All right. So, let me ask Representative Shope about that. I mean, how do you define what is essential? Let me back up a bit. Is everybody in agreement then on the panel that you can go back into session, resume the session, but really only do COVID-related bills, and that means very limited? Let me ask Representative Fernandez. Are you yes on that one?
Absolutely. I know we can. We've got members that are coming up with legislation as we speak that would provide relief for many of the people that have been affected by COVID-19. There's things we can talk about, like technology throughout the state of Arizona. Many of our government agencies, for instance, unemployment insurance, where we haven't invested in the technology there, that it was almost impossible. And in all fairness, this is happening in several other states, where they couldn't adapt to, processing $600 payments that the federal government is providing. So we've got the funds, but we have no mechanism to provide the payment. I think that's going to happen in the next week or so, when it should have happened 3 weeks ago. SNAP, money for needy families, that they couldn't spend it at certain places, that they couldn't buy groceries online because it's SNAP dollars. Those are things we could address right now, and legislation that members of the House and the Senate have already put together. And if you go back and look at on March 23rd, all the amendments, every amendment that we put on every budget item had to do with COVID relief. So yeah, we are ready right now to go back and work on COVID-19 issues. And but if we have to sine die, then we'll be back in our communities working and building that legislation when we go back in special session.
So Senator Bradley, are you on the same page here?
I'll give you a qualified yes.
Qualified yes. Go
I'd
ahead,
qualify it because I suspect that all of us have been getting calls from lobbyists asserting that their particular bill is somehow COVID related all of a sudden. And so by the qualification is that not everything that everybody believes to be COVID related is actually COVID related. So certainly anything that's an emergent need that we have to deal with to facilitate the economy, to keep people safe, of course, would certainly agree to that. But my qualification is that not everything, and again, we get so focused on our particular bills sometimes that we forget that there will be another session in January that will happen, and that's only 6 or 7 months away. So that's my qualification.
So Senator Fann, it seems to me that do you see yourself actually agreeing with going in doing COVID related however that is defined, for what, a week or two? Is that something that in fact is sort of the emerging plan at this point?
I don't know that there's an emerging plan other than what I stated earlier, is that if we are going to do, if we were going to do a half a dozen truly directly COVID related bills that are ready to go and they wouldn't be controversial, I could see us going in and doing that, because we could get a lot of this done maybe in a day, with the way things are set up. But as I said, everybody thinks that their bills are somehow COVID related. And we do have some very boisterous members that are pushing very hard to just do everything. And I don't think we should go down that path unless we're ready to have those front doors open. It's not safe. Also, I'd like to bring one more thing up real quick, something that I am working on, because we know that, nobody saw this coming. I mean, in the back of our mind, we always have emergencies that come up, but I am going to, as soon as we get over this fall or earlier, I'm going to start setting up some bipartisan task force subcommittees, if you will, and have each committee start dealing with, okay, we need to be a little better prepared. Obviously our computer systems were not ready to handle these magnitudes, the SNAP issues, all those things. So I would like to have all of our members start working on the solutions. Now that we see the problems, we can start coming up with some better policy about how to handle this in the future.
So
but I think one of the things we need to work on, and at the House, I'll speak just because I know, experience from the House, is that, if these bills were so important that many of the members want to go back and work on, I guess they call them signature bills. I'm not sure, they're called something else too, but signature bills, if they're so important, why didn't we work on them earlier in the session? I mean, they kept holding them, and there was days literally that we sat at the legislature with no floor action. And these bills were sitting there somewhere, ready to be heard, ready to be put forth in committee and go to the floor, go to the Senate, come back, whatever it looks like. But we just held on to them. And then March 23rd rolled around and the pandemic happened. Now we want to go back and take care of business that we should have taken care of in February, in early March. So maybe we need to start thinking about how we're going to do things differently at the House, that we take care of business early on. We try to get things done rather than sit there day after day after day without doing any business.
So let me ask Representative Shope about that, sir. So I think part of the, Representative Fernandez, correct me if I'm wrong here, part of the presumption of what you said is that if these measures are so important, they're going to be tackled early on and passed early on. And we did see 50 bills or so that were tackled early on, and they went for the process. And so the presumption there is that if these outstanding bills have not been approved, by mid-March, then in the hierarchy of values, they're not that high in the priority list. Am I right to presume this is the case, Representative Shope?
Probably yes and no. It's probably a little bit more nuanced there. Look, the reality is there was still a couple weeks left in committee work where bills had already moved to the other chamber. So many of those bills were already scheduled for committee, that were House bills in the Senate and then vice versa, Senate bills in the House. So they would have been ready for floor action. I would say that if there were still, for example, House bills waiting to get passed out of the House or Senate bills waiting to get passed out of the Senate, then yeah, that's probably a lot. I would say maybe Leader Fernandez has a point there, because theoretically those bills should have crossed over during crossover week, 2 weeks earlier. But as far as bills that were House bills that were in the Senate, they were making their way through the process, and Senate bills in the House, and many of those were already scheduled for work, and before we decided that we had to go ahead and essentially vacate the building with the pandemic coming on. So I think it's probably a more nuanced than it is black and white.
So Senator Fann, let me ask you something real quick. So let's say, for example, that at some point you do decide to come back and resume the session and maybe do like a couple of bills. Maybe they're COVID related bills, but maybe there are other measures that everybody kind of considers should be tackled, right? So in any case, you go into a physical space again. And there's a question of safety. There's a question of, large gatherings. You did mention earlier on that if you're going to resume session, it's going to be a full-blown resumption, right? You're not going to limit committee testimony. You're going to let the public in. So there are all sorts of these things that you do have to consider. Tell us, if we did go into session, and granted, we don't know what the COVID crisis looks like in a week or so, right? We don't know if the infection rate's gone down dramatically. We don't, we see some of that, but we don't really know what 2 weeks holds, right? So how does that look like then?
That's a really good question, Luigi, and that's why I just keep, as we have members that come up and say, this is what we want to do, I present that back to them and say, you realize if you guys want to do this, these are the dynamics and the hurdles that are going to have to be addressed. Now, the House, they set up a much more liberal remote voting system, and their members are all okay with that. I will tell you, my Republican Senate caucus members, almost every one of them are opposed to remote voting. There is a handful that says we're okay with it, but the rest of them are saying no, we should have people there. So if we're going to do more than just a small number of directly COVID related bills, then we need to start asking those questions. We are not going to shut the public out if we're going to be doing massive amounts of bills.
So let me flesh it out a little bit more. If you're saying if it's only COVID related measures and there's a limited number of them, and all the leaders and the caucuses kind of agree, at least in principle, that these are what's considered essential, you need to pass them, then under that scenario, you may limit testimony. You may limit, the people's ability to go enter the Senate or the House chambers.
Let's not go down that path, Luigi, because it's not a member of limiting. I think what we're talking about is those very few numbers of COVID that would say, how do we improve the SNAP program? How do we do this? When I am not talking huge policy issues of what they're talking about of wanting to blow the whole thing up. So there is that very, very fine line. And whatever goes there, if it's going to be limited, it needs to be, quite honestly, as uncontroversial as possible. One of the reasons that things do get bogged down, I am blessed in the Senate that I have amazing senators from both sides of the aisles that we work with. And so we're able to get our work done faster. Over in the House, they've got 60 members with varying opinions. And, sometimes it takes 2 or 3 hours to have a good solid debate on the floor about a bill. So if we're going to go in and limit what we're doing and the time that we're doing it in, we've got to have those perimeters set up as well.
So what I'm hearing is that right now you really don't know yet what you're going to do.
That's correct.
Okay. All right.
And Luigi,
Well
we
said.
have to remember, I know that Mrs. Fann brought up the remote voting. We have to remember, if we go into committees, we don't have the ability to do remote voting. So if one of our members is voting from Tucson and they belong to a certain committee that's going to hear a bill, we have to figure out what that's going to look like. So there's a lot of issues. The remote voting is fine for some. I personally, I'm not a fan. Sorry, fan. But the committees, it would be a whole different ballgame.
Okay. Let me shift to your interactions with the governor's office. And I know that last week, for example, the legislative leaders met with the governor, and what we're hearing and
can I correct you?
Go ahead.
I'm just going to make a correction. The legislative leaders on the majority side, as a minority leader, our members were not invited.
Right. So the Republican leaders met with the governor last week. And what we're hearing from the ground, and here Senator Fann and Representative Shope, correct me please if I'm wrong. It was a meeting in which you were expressing, your members, first of all, frustration with the length of the stay-at-home order, or rather the extension with the stay-at-home order, and the fact that some of your members are really pushing for reopening the economy sooner rather than later. want to ask Senate President Fann, how did that meeting go? Can you tell us about what the interaction was like?
So to correct the record, so yes, there were a handful of us that went up and met with the staff. And we did express our concerns to the staff about a lot of our constituents, and this is not partisan. These are R's and D's alike of the constituents out there are, they're just wondering, why is it okay to go in to Costco with 500 people, but you can't go into, say, Representative Osborne's little jewelry store where there might be 5 people. And so, yeah, so we talk about things about what we're relaying information of what the constituents are saying to us so that they understand what's going on there. They have a lot of business folks that are weighing in. They have a lot of conference calls, Zoom calls with all those business people. We're trying to relay to them what the constituents are saying and the frustrations that they have. Now, when we talk about the governor, let me be very clear with that. I had a one-on-one phone conversation with the governor Friday afternoon at 2, and Speaker Bowers had a one-on-one conversation with the governor, I believe, about 4 o'clock. It wasn't all leadership. It was strictly just myself and Speaker Bowers, and those were calls that we set up with the governor. We called and asked for those. So, ma'am,
when you spoke with the governor and you relayed these messages to them, can you tell us what the governor told you?
Yes, he was very anxious and was appreciative to hear this information. Sometimes he is so busy with so many things. He really does need to have input for everybody. So he was very, very appreciative of this information. He was very anxious to know that we were going to get more numbers over the weekend. And he said he was going to get with staff immediately so that they could look at the numbers. They could talk about how best we can start moving Arizona forward as safely as possible. And as you notice, once those numbers were released, and once he was able to talk to Dr. Christ and his staff and everyone else, that's what prompted that 3 o'clock message yesterday that we received from him.
So we felt that your conversation with the governor was productive. He listened to frustrations of the members, assuming, of course, that I'm sorry, let me back up a bit. I'm assuming he's watching what's going on Twitter. Maybe he doesn't have the time, but there's a lot of those on social media already. So he kind of knows, what the frustrations of some members are. Did you feel like when you talked to him, he listened and he was amenable to making changes? And are you now then saying that as a result of those conversations with yourself and with Speaker Bowers, you saw the governor act, yesterday?
Yes, I believe so. We do have some members that are still a little frustrated. They would hope that he would have gone, an extra step forward with a couple of things. But yes, all in all, I think he was very attentive, and he and the staff listened to what our concerns are. And I think that's what exactly. And again, the statistics came out showing that he was comfortable enough to start making those steps.
Let me ask Senator Bradley here. You've seen how the governor handled this crisis over the last couple of weeks. What do you think of what I would consider tentative moves to reopen the economy up to this point, sir?
Yeah, again, as I said earlier, we've been supportive of the governor in terms of his cautiousness, of his approach. All of us came at this at a huge disadvantage. And we came at it backwards. If we look at what happened in other countries, and a very good example is Taiwan. The city of Taipei, which is roughly 4.5 million, if you include the surrounding area, but smaller basically than Phoenix. They never shut down. They got control of the issue up front because they started in December. 400,000 of their folks go back and forth from China for regular business. They knew who they were. They intercepted those folks and found out very early on. They started testing very early on. They did all the cheap things, in terms of cost, up front because they were prepared for it. We were not so lucky. We started at the other end. We started at the most expensive end of starting to shut things down, to get control, and to barter for time. I mean, what we're all doing here across the country is we're trying to get time to get to pharmaceutical interventions. But in the meantime, until those are present, so there's a pill you can take to stop it, or a shot that you can get to prevent it. In the meantime, we jumped to the most expensive things, shutting things down, banning things, economic interventions. All those are very expensive. And so the governor was at a disadvantage from the get-go, and whose fault that is, one could ascribe it probably to the lack of federal interventions early on, all those things. But in any event, we are where we're at. And so we have tried to be appreciative of the governor's approach. I mean, I think in order for us to move on in any kind of significant way, is we're going to have to go retroactively to what other countries did up front. And the key issue is the testing. You've got to know who has this. It was present here in Arizona months before we thought it was. And because we didn't know, we weren't able to intervene appropriately. So we have been supportive of the governor and will continue to be as long as our sense is from the folks that we're talking to, that we're approaching this and from a scientific point of view. The virus does not care. The virus got to the most secluded people in the state of Arizona is a person on death row. One of those people got the virus and is dead. So the virus doesn't care where you are. It doesn't care what money you have. It doesn't care how many guns you have. It doesn't care how rich you are, how poor you are. It doesn't matter. It only submits to science. And it is the science that'll get us out of this. And as long as the governor follows that suit, we'll be supportive of him. If we think he doesn't, then we'll be making it clear that we disagree.
Representative Shope, sir, there are a lot of members in your caucus that want to forcibly lift the emergency order of the governor, right? So you've seen a couple of your members really pressing for that action. Where are you on that one personally? And is that feasible in your chamber?
Look, I respect everybody's strong feelings about it. It's something that I do not support. I do think that the governor has taken a very measured and reasoned approach to the opening back up. We are on our way, as we saw yesterday. Even after the news conference, we saw the governor's office release I think Senator Bradley alluded to it a little earlier, some of the measures that they would like to see as far as guidelines that businesses can take. I've said it for a while now, as somebody who's involved in two essential services in finance and in grocery. There are measures that these essential businesses took that were never shut down at the beginning of this pandemic to make sure that their employees and customers and things like that were safe going into those businesses. They should be emulated as much as possible across the spectrum as we go ahead and open things up. So Friday we will go into having retail open and salons, etc. Those of you who know me know that you've never seen my hair this long. So hopefully we can get back in some semblance. But I think that there's a respect that goes a couple different ways. I think Leader Fernandez mentioned it earlier. There's going to be some businesses who don't feel comfortable opening up yet. And I think that is their right to do so. The safety of their employees, et cetera, what have you. So I think that as we move forward, look, I think the governor has done as good a job as he possibly can. My conversations with his staff have been, I think, very fruitful and positive, and I look forward to continuing to work with.
Is that proposal feasible in your chamber?
Well, look, the great thing about legislative being in the legislature is any legislator can go ahead and put up any bill that they would like. As far as having it written up, it has to have 3116. I don't know that it does. So from that sense, just from a mathematical perspective, is it feasible? Probably not.
So, there's a couple of institutional barriers you have to overcome in order to introduce anything at this point, right? Foremost of them is you have to be in session, and you're not in session. But when I asked Senator Fann, I'm assuming if such a proposal were to get out of the House, which is the chances of that happening seems to be pretty small at this point. It's DOA in your chamber. Is that a correct assumption?
Well, if you're relating directly to the nuclear bill, as that we're calling it, I can tell you right now, no, I'd have to double check with my counterpart, Senator Bradley, but to my knowledge, based on what I know from his members already, and some of my members, no, the votes would not be there. But let me also talk about something the logistics that nobody wants to talk about. If there was a nuclear bill that literally just wiped out the governor's declaration of emergency, I've been telling everybody, please be prepared to have a companion bill, because if that goes away, all of his provisions go away. So, that provision that says that you've got an extension to file your income taxes, state income taxes, till July 15th, that goes away. People's taxes will be due tomorrow. He's got something in place that says, no, you can't evict people out of their businesses or their homes while we're under this declaration. That would go away. He has done a lot of these over the last 30, 40 days, and those would all stop. So it would be irresponsible for us to put a bill up that says we're going to do away with the emergency clause, but without looking at the unintended consequences that would literally hurt our constituents.
So,
BG, and I'm not an attorney, but I'm thinking that bill, that nuclear bill that Ms. Fann is talking about, wouldn't even be able to be heard unless it's approved by the Senate President and the Speaker of the House at this point in time. So, that could just be null and void from the get-go, that's not going to happen, because it has to be, they have to give the approval that bill will be heard. And I also want to mention something else that Ms. Fann said, where she said about Costco. Why is Costco allowed to be open when a jewelry store is not? Well, I want to tell you, Costco has stepped up, and I think more businesses need to step up. When you walk into a Costco in the state of Arizona, they'll hand you a mask to wear. And they are promoting social distancing. If more businesses would do that, I think people would be more apt to go out to these businesses and patronize them. And I think that the governor's order would be well taken. This has to be modeling from us. You have to wear that mask. You have to promote the social distancing. And that's why places like Costco, yes, that's why they were able to remain open.
So let me pause here for a second and again ask our audience, if you have questions, please do send them in. In fact, we are getting some questions already, so let me ask some of them. Senator Fann, you tweeted that you are drafting legislation that would help the efforts to define the next steps and move Arizona forward. Can you tell us a little bit more about what this draft legislation that you're considering?
Well, there's a couple of things we are looking at. We're not ready to put out all the details, but some of the things that we are, obviously there's a number of us that would like to see a few more businesses opened. We've already talked about that. Personally, I don't think we're ready to blow the whole thing up and say, okay, we're ready to have conventions with 5,000 people walking down the halls coughing on each other, or Cardinal Stadium opening up. But, I think people are anxious to get swimming pools open. There's anxious, like in our condos and our apartment complexes, which and practice safe CDC guidelines. We can do that and give our stores, I think stores would, if given the opportunity, of course, they're going to follow those CDC guidelines. They want to make sure their customers are safe. But we're also looking at some other things. One of those is we are concerned about property taxes. There's been a request to delay them. That would not be feasible for a lot of reasons, which I won't go into, but we certainly can pass it and say, look, penalties and interest will be waived up until a certain period, maybe October or something, to give people some breathing room to catch up if they can't do it. we also want to make sure we want to look at what we can do for our businesses. There is some concern about frivolous, maybe not frivolous, but lawsuits that may occur out of this, out of no fault of their own. So we want to make sure that businesses feel a little more comfortable that, you know, they just finally get up and going, and now there might be some lawsuits filed for no reason. And so just a couple of things like that we're working on.
So here's another question. So the governor's executive order extension is through May 15th. I know you mentioned that you kind of don't know what you're going to do insofar as whether you resume or what's going to be the parameters of that resumption, right? But is there an expectation then that once that order expires on May 15th, there's sort of an artificial deadline that governors laid out for to a certain degree to the legislature as well, and there's a May 15 date. Representative Shope, is that your expectation that you're gonna go back into session, by May 15 or shortly thereafter?
I think it's definitely possible. I mean, one of the things we have to consider is, if we go back to the beginning of this conversation, is what exactly is the plan if and when we do come back. I am not a believer at all in just saying, all right, let's schedule a day and then we go ahead and decide what we're going to do whenever we get in there. I don't think that's the way we should operate. So I think that we should probably have an idea of what we're doing, if we do go in around that time. But no, I think that's a good goal to do so. And I would also agree with President Fann in the sense that if when that does happen, it is my hope, and it will be my counsel as well, that we have it as do so in as transparent a way as possible, with the public being allowed to come in. I would hope that they would adhere to CDC guidelines, etc. But I think that does need to happen. I don't believe in doing this in some sort of a shielded vacuum away from the general public.
Representative Fernandez, what about you, ma'am? What about May 15 as sort of a goal to reopen the resume session?
Well, if that's the case, we won't know until May 14th, because I didn't know until April 30th that we weren't going to be back on May 1st. So, we're on a need-to-know basis. We'll find out when majority decides that we should know. So our caucus will be ready to come back. Like I said, whether to sine die or to work on COVID-related bills. I appreciate what Mr. Shope is saying, that we need to do this in the light of day, not like we do the budget at 2 or 3 in the morning. That's been our practice, to do things at 2 or 3 in the morning. So I don't know what's different. I'm hoping that maybe public interest and public pressure has made the majority decide that we need to have the public input.
Senator Bradley, the same question, sir. I mean, does May 15 sound like a reasonable potential date for resuming session, or we don't, we can't really say until.
Obviously, none of us can answer this question because we don't know. On May 14th, we may, again, if we've cranked up testing and we've got more data that's showing, hey, that we're not on top of this as much as we thought we were, or whatever. I mean, those are all factors. I don't think that I don't typically like to speak for my caucus in a kind of general way without having spoken to them individually or collectively. But we're not going to agree. We're not going to agree to an open-ended opening. It's going to be more like a special session where we say, here's what we're going to do. We can accomplish this. We suspend some rules, and we can do it in a day, at most 2 days. That's what we would probably talk about. If the notion that we would go there to have committee hearings, I think borders on ludicrous. I mean, we can't just ignore the science of this. It's not, the virus does not care what you think and what you believe. It moves, and it only responds to the science of dealing with it. And so if we're going to go back, I think it has to be very clear. This is what we're going to do. This is the time frame. Most of it's going to be remote, if at all possible, and we'll be done with this.
So just real quick, go ahead, ma'am. Go ahead, ma'am.
I'm so sorry. I just want to jump in something to make sure everybody's clear about something. First of all, the governor is, we are under an governor's emergency proclamation, right? And so we have that in place that is dealing with all these emergency orders and everything that he's doing every day. So the May 15th is only the stay at order portion of it. So whether he extends it, doesn't extend it, opens it up, that doesn't mean the declaration of emergency goes away. Two separate things. And so let's say on May 15th or before, he does away with the quote, stay at home. That does not mean that based on the numbers, the testing, everything else, he may still have guidelines that says, but no, I don't want groups of more than 25 or 50. I don't want, we're not ready to blow the whole thing up. So please remember, we're talking two different things here. We've got the declaration that can continue with some sort of guidelines and then you also have, exactly when is it free and able to open up the door so we can have 50 or 100 people in a room.
So a quick follow-up question. I think this question from one of our audience is, I think, very relevant, which is how do you then preserve democracy and safety for the people to participate safely? Let's say if we go back to committees, in a couple of weeks.
Yeah. There are no guarantees that we can keep them safe if they're in there. In any of our committee rooms, in the gallery, there are no guarantees at all that we can keep them safe.
Representative Shope, do you feel the same way? You really cannot guarantee, and therefore you can't really say then that you're going to be safe coming to the state capitol.
Well, I think the premise of the question from the audience is just, how can anybody guarantee anything? I just don't really know that that's something that we need to be in the business of doing.
Right. There may be some measures that you can do, right? For example,
absolutely.
You can hand out like masks to people that are coming in. That means you'll have to procure masks, for example. Mm-hmm. Maybe a lot of hand sanitizer, something like that. Maybe you can make it so that people are not, seated beside each other. There's like some sort of a separation. There are some measures you can do.
Right.
But yeah, you're right. You can never really.
Right. And a lot of those, Luigi, I think that we instituted even before we left there, and it's little things like, hand sanitizer stations at doorways and the elevator areas and things like that, having a cleaning schedule that we had already instituted a few weeks before we left. So yes, a lot of those measures that are at this point in time, we look back on it and we're like, wow, I can't believe we weren't doing some of that stuff already. And it's just like the other things of, I can't believe that we've had to remind people to wash their hands so often, those things are taking place. For sure.
Hey, those are things that you kind of learn at kindergarten, right? Wash your hands.
One would think, and growing up in a grocery store, it's ingrained in my mind that that's what's supposed to happen.
So are there any plans for, to prepare for a possible second wave, or really hoping that doesn't happen, right? And we're hoping that once we get over this hump, there is no second wave, but there is a potential for a second wave. And I do wonder if you've considered what sorts of preparations you'll have to do in case there is a second wave. I guess let me start with Senator Bradley and then go on to Senate President Fann.
Yeah, well, as I said before, again, we're talking, you learn acronyms every day in this environment. And the one I learned the other day was NPI, which is non-pharmaceutical intervention. So as I said earlier, they range from cheaper to more expensive. We started, because we were late in identifying everything, we started at the wrong end. To eliminate or to prevent that second wave, we got to get back to the beginning. And that has a lot to do with the whole issue of testing. Who has this disease? Who have they had contact with? How do we follow up and make sure that those people get isolated and quarantined for a period of time? And have our resources in place to be able to deal with the medical issues that would come about on at the beginning of a second wave, to make sure that our healthcare system is in place, that we have all the tools that that are necessary to execute that. But I can't
emphasize.
There's the word.
Yeah.
the importance of testing. We've got to know who has this, and we've got to follow the trail. Again, this thing will succumb only to science, not to magic, not to whatever you're upset about. That's all well and good, and we understand that and appreciate people's frustrations. But in order to get control, we have to do this in a way that is scientifically based and gets back to the beginning of those first interventions that we skipped this time. We can't skip them again. We do skip them again. The second wave will be twice this way.
So, Senate President Fann, ma'am, let me ask you, because we are facing a $1 billion deficit, right? That's an inescapable fact. We don't know how worse things are going to be in a couple months. We are hoping that the economy rebounds pretty quickly, right? And that, we don't have, this is not going to be a lingering affair. But how do you propose to solve $1 billion deficit?
Well, I will say one thing is that our House and Senate members on both sides have been amazingly wonderful about making sure that we work with the governor for that $1 billion rainy day fund. That is sure nice to have in our back pocket. And then all of us working together on that quote skinny budget. We had $600-700 million that we were going to spend on some good worthwhile projects, but we all just put that on hold until we could see exactly where this is going to go and how bad it is. So those are going to go a long way to getting us back on track. And we are hugely fortunate because there's a lot of states that didn't have any rainy day, and literally they're in a world of hurt right now.
Are we going to see, and this might be a ludicrous question at this point because we kind of don't know what our finances are going to look like exactly, but do you anticipate to see a lot of cuts to programs and to agencies?
It's way too early to see that. I think we will have a better handle once we have the April and May numbers in. And again, the state income tax that we pushed off till July 15th, that obviously, if we don't know what people are going to be paying and contributing for the 2020 tax year, or 2019, I should say, then we won't have a handle on that. So we don't even want to discuss that until we know exactly where we're at.
Can I get your response to that, Representative Fernandez?
Well, I want to go back to what Ms. Fann said about the rainy day fund. I too am glad that we do have a rainy day fund that we can fall back on, and I hope we do use it. That rainy day fund was created because we have been, shortchanging our government agencies, and this has proven it. Whether it be Department of Education, Department of Economic Security, Department of Agriculture, we have been shortchanging them for years and years and years, and that's why we built up this nest egg of over $1 billion. But again, we're going to have to spend it. We're going to have to spend it on all those places that we've cut. I've already talked to you about the technology part of it, but we can go back to the fact that we owe public education over $1 billion, and what they've had to put into place just to get people to teachers to work from home. The training that's been involved, the devices that they've had to purchase, the people that aren't able to get to access schoolwork because they don't have broadband, they don't have Wi-Fi. We've shortchanged them. I mean, there's so many things that we have not invested in order to have this rainy day fund. So I hope that we will indeed spend it. I think that as long as we are creative in our work, I know the federal government is going to provide some money that if we put it in the right places, maybe that rainy day fund won't get hit as hard as we think it might have to. But we're going to have to work together. This isn't something that Republicans can do alone, and this isn't something that Democrats can do alone. It's got to be the two parties working together in both chambers and with our governor. I mean, that's the goal, and that's the fact.
So let me ask you this as a kind of a question as a reporter, right? Because you've talked about transparency, of course, and the fact that in the case of Senate President Karen Fann, I mean, you're very cognizant of the fact that if you're going to do committee hearings, you should open it up to the public. But I do want to ask you about your Zoom meetings, and I guess this is to all the leaders on the panel. Or having Zoom meetings with your members. I wonder if you think that limits transparency. First of all, in my mind, it kind of does, right? Until or unless you open your Zoom meetings to the public, for example. And so let me just ask Senator Bradley, Representative Shope, Representative Fernandez, Senate President Fann, what do you make of the fact that, you know, some of the traditions that we hold dear, like transparency, for example, have had to kind of suffer as a result? And are you willing to open up your Zoom meetings with your members to the public? Senator Bradley.
Yeah. Well, I think we're all adjusting to a new environment, and I think at the other end of this, things are going to be different in terms of how people operate and communicate going forward. I mean, this isn't. One shouldn't be left with the notion that, hey, we're going to have this wrapped up in June, July, August, and everything's going to go back hunky-dory in the way it was. It's not. And so you bring up good points in terms of communicating with folks. I mean, I think, having formal meetings open to the public, makes sense. And how we do that realistically over time, we'll just need to adjust accordingly. But I
can host that meeting, for example, if you want me to. I can host that Zoom meetings with with
sure,
your members.
Sure,
if you
we can probably
to.
arrange for that to happen. Again, I think we're all in a crisis mode. I mean, if you were to listen into any of our conversations, they're dull in the sense that it's not a strategy session. We're not trying to politicize this in any kind of way. Our meetings are very focused on dealing with what's happening to the people that we represent and how we can get services to them. How do we get the system, the government to respond better? That's what all of our meetings are about. I mean,
what about? I'm sorry, Senator Bradley. You didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, that's okay.
Representative Shope, just really quickly, sir, because we're almost out of time. Would you open your Zoom meetings to the public?
Look, I think if we were talking about specific pieces of legislation, that's something that you'd have to consider. I mean, I guess in that sense, we haven't had a traditional caucus where we're talking about bills, specific bills. So our traditional caucuses, much like on the Senate side and in our colleagues on the Democratic side, are open to the public. We haven't had one of those. I think that we've had some good meetings. It's been nice to catch up with folks. Probably for the most part, a lot of it is catching up and trying to figure out, as Mr. Bradley mentioned, we have people coming to us with unemployment concerns, things like that. How do we cut the red tape to get them, get these constituents the things that they need? There were some good things that have been shared as far as how we get some of that info out there. And I'm sure that my colleagues on the other side and in the other chamber are doing pretty much the same thing that we're doing.
Representative Fernandez, ma'am, what about opening your Zoom meetings with members to the public?
Well, we haven't had Zoom meetings, we have conference calls. Our caucuses during the last 2 years that I've been in leadership have all been open. We've never had a closed caucus that I can think of. That's a good discussion to have about closed caucuses, totally, right? Because there are caucuses that do have closed caucus. We don't. Like I said, we've had conference calls. I can't imagine adding another person on there to hear, much like what Mr. Shope said, is that we are getting calls from our constituents. We're getting emails about the red tape to get any services and how difficult it is and how we navigate that system for our constituents. Many of us are taking back what we're learning in our own communities back to another representative to help in their communities. So those calls, that's what we've been talking about in our calls. We haven't gotten to legislation. I know members are working on legislation because they tell us that they are, based on what they're hearing from their constituents.
So Senator Fann, you got the last word on here, ma'am. What about opening your Zoom meetings, maybe with Representative Bowers too, to the public?
Well, I am not an expert in IT, but I will tell you right now, based on what's happened this past week, one of the reasons the Zooms have been working is because we know specifically who should be on and who shouldn't be on. But if you see what happened to Senator Steele and her Zoom meeting, if we can't have more security on Zoom or any other platform, then we need to find a better way to let our public weigh in, because that is not going to be good if we have a similar hacking going on.
So I think we are out of time. I do want to ask you just one quick thing, and maybe you can just say a word or a phrase. What is a silver lining for you in this crisis? What's been the best thing that happened? Let me start with Representative Fernandez, just real quick, ma'am.
Kindness of the people.
Senator Bradley?
Yeah, mutual responsibility. That's what this is all about.
Senate President Fann?
Go to TJ. I haven't figured out the answer for that one.
All right, Representative Shope, sir.
I think resilience, the resilience that defines Americans over history.
And Senate President Fann, ma'am, you got the last word.
Okay. I think that we're going to learn a lot out of this that will help us be better prepared in the future.
And with that, I want to thank you all for spending your morning with us. I want to thank Compass Strategies for sponsoring. And you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you and bye for now.
Thank you.
Be safe. Be safe.
Be safe. Yes. Wash your hands. Be safe.
Yes. Take care, Luigi, of your mom.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.